Welcome to the number one show and the source of truth for all things MedTech. Here, we reveal the secrets and stories behind the investments, science, and commercialization of the MedTech industry. Every week, we'll take you on a wild ride with the biggest names in the game, from entrepreneurs and investors who are shaking up the market to healthcare providers who are revolutionizing the way we think and practice medicine. So hold on tight and get ready for a journey like no other. This is the State of MedTech. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Now, this is a new series of episodes that I also want to kick off, which is around strategics and strategic deals. I have Joe Urban, who's the CEO of Potrero Medical on. Joe is a CEO that I used to work for many years ago, somebody who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, not just as a CEO, but even more so as a leader. He's somebody that I look to a lot for a lot of mentorship back then, now as well with my business. And if anything, Joe has really exemplified what it means to be a great leader, both on the operator side, but also in terms of, leading people. Now, with that being said, before I kind of introduce the topic, why strategic deals? Why this new category? The reason why is that we've entered an interesting time in MedTech where we're playing with much bigger stakes. There's more money involved. It's more complicated in the market, but that also lends itself to a lot of opportunity. And I want to introduce sort of the wave of technology that we're in. The third wave, to be exact. The third wave was something I wrote about many years ago when AOL co-founder Steve Case wrote about the evolution of technology and the internet as three distinct waves, and I think this applies to our industry. The first wave, which lasted from 1985 to 1999, was about building the internet and making it accessible to the masses. This period was marked by the establishment of internet's like foundational infrastructure like AOL, Cisco, Microsoft. Those are the key players creating a way for people to get online and introduce them to digital technologies. The second wave, from 2000 to 2015, was characterized by the building of apps and services on top of that existing internet infrastructure, right? During this period, companies like Google, Facebook, Twitter, they all rose to prominence and provided software applications, social media platforms, and mobile technologies that transformed how we interact and conduct business. The third wave, which is what we're in now, is all about integrating the internet seamlessly and ubiquitously into everyday life, right? Which enables the transformations across important sectors like health, education, transportation, so on and so forth. And this wave is marked by a more significant interaction between technology and the real world, which often requires partnership and collaboration with incumbent players for the new technology to be accepted and adopted. And it is in this wave that's... How does this relate to, MedTech? Well, if you look at strategics are not just throwing money around and acquiring companies. They definitely still are, but they play a much more bigger role than that in terms of how they fund companies, accelerate their progress, for adoption, and then essentially acquire them to tuck them into their core business model. Okay, Potrero Medical, the company that Joe Urban, our guest, is CEO of, is a pioneering figure in that third wave, in my opinion. Okay, and essentially the reason why is that they use advanced technology to predict and prevent acute kidney injury. For context, acute kidney injury has about 300,000 deaths a year in the United States alone. That number is bigger than breast cancer, colorectal cancer, diabetes, and heart failure all combined. And I'm quoting that from a publication that I've often, looked at in the past when I worked for them, which is by Andrew Lewington, Jorge Cerda, and then Ravindra Mehta. You can look it up, called "Raising Awareness of Acute Kidney Injury: A Global Perspective of a Silent Killer." Okay, the reason why we've never heard about that is because nothing really has existed until now, or at least recently with Potrero's product, to solve this. Okay. And so through their product, the Acumen monitoring system, Potrero essentially has digitized the kidney. Okay, think about that. Digitizing the kidney. How? Potrero has hardware, okay, that automates a vital sign, the capturing of vital sign. In this case, it's urine output. In the past, it was essentially just eyeballed. They pour the urine out into a cup and they measure it and they write it down. Okay, this is why so many acute kidney injury patients leave the hospital not knowing that they've had an AKI event, and then they die later of some issue. Usually it's like heart failure or something, okay? And essentially by automating that process and capturing that data, Potrero was able to translate all that data and hire data scientists to train algorithms and develop their predictive algorithm for acute kidney injury, which they got. So through automation, through the data capture, okay, they were able to transform the way we understand and monitor an organ, in this case the kidney, and thereby allowing them to technically own. That's why I get excited about companies like Potrero. They're going to be the first of many that I bring on and that help, show how you take a piece of hardware, automate a process, right, or a vital sign, capture the data, and then translate that data into some kind of predictive algorithm or even a data set and digitize an organ. So Potrero embodies that third wave MedTech company, a technological advancement in healthcare that extends beyond just innovation, that's with deep-rooted partnerships and a sharp focus on high-value health conditions. And by digitizing the kidney, Potrero has essentially positioned itself at the forefront of this third wave, owning a vital piece of healthcare. Okay. Now, something I do not talk about on the episode because Joe's he's an acting CEO of this company, but I'm going to say it here. The way I see this is that when you've digitized an organ the way Potrero does, right? How does that set up partnerships with larger companies and strategics who, let's say, may have, for example, certain devices that can integrate with this, that help with the delivery, let's say drug delivery, for example, right? Or certain therapies, And so that's the part that I get really excited about in the startup ecosystem, is that the idea of companies finding ways to automate processes that have never been automated before, and as a result, capturing data in a continuous manner that's never happened in its history, and thus you digitize an organ. So with that being said, this is our episode with Joe Urban, CEO of Potrero Medical, on Potrero, the digitization of a organ, and the strategic landscape of how that will play out. Before we get to that episode, I want to remind our listeners, if you are a startup CEO or founder, your early stage company, I know and can appreciate what you're going through. The stress of trying to raise money. How do you stay relevant in the market? How do you market yourself as a leader and as a company so that investors take interest and take notice? And at the same time, you can get some commercial traction with early adopters, that physician that you want to adopt your product to really be a KOL for your company. All this can be so difficult, but it doesn't have to be. If you learn how to use social media and put highly engaging content through social at scale, you're able to attract investors, you're able to bring in commercial pipeline early on, and just as importantly, find those early adopters who are going to really champion your product. If this resonates with you, if this is something that you are struggling with, I can help you. One of the great companies that I've helped from the very beginning when they were coming out of stealth mode was Moon Surgical, a great robotics company out of Paris, France, with amazing CEO and Anne Ostuit and their chief strategy officer, Jeffrey Alvarez. They came to me in December of 2021 with only 30 days before they headed to JP Morgan Healthcare Conference to raise money. No one knew who they were. They didn't have their message out there. They needed help. Within those 30 days, we were able to develop magnetic messaging, create highly engaging content, do a live stream webinar that generated leads and was a CME based webinar, which attracted physicians. And all of this helped them and put them in a better position in front of investors and prospective customers in those following months. What happened later? That spring, Moon Surgical was able to raise a $31 million Series A. And then since then, they've raised a $55 million Series B with NVIDIA leading the round. Now, is that going to happen for you? Maybe. But most importantly, how do you lay a foundation early on that allows you to leverage and gain that kind of momentum so you can be in the best position to get those kind of results? Here's what Anne Ostuit, the CEO of Moon Surgical, and Jeffrey Alvarez, the chief strategy officer of Moon Surgical, had to say about the live stream event.
We had a lot of direct contacts and people just reaching out to us after hearing the event, whether it was live or in replay, and both are actually really important. And surgeons and investors reach out to us for further dialogue or questions that they had following the event. It's incredibly powerful.
The MedTech Live event, a great event in that it brought a number of different surgeons as well as industry professionals where we were able to interact with them in real time, answer their questions, and really share our vision for the future and what Moon Surgical is aspiring to do. That's why we reached out to Khateeb & Co. to really help raise awareness about who we were, what we were doing, and what our vision for the future was.
So if you're a startup CEO or founder and you need this kind of help, you want to be in a better position to get those kind of results, I want to work with you. Shoot me a message on LinkedIn, send me an email at hello@khateebandco.com, or very simply, just go to my website, khateebandco.com, and just scroll down, click one of the buttons that relates to you in terms of what you're trying to do, whether it's marketing or fundraising or sales, and book time with me, and we'll see how we can help you. Now, with that being said, let's get on to our episode with Joe Urban, CEO of Potrero Medical. Welcome back to the show, everybody. I can't believe it took over 70 episodes, but here with us today, we got the great, the powerful, the infamous CEO of Potrero Medical, my former company, Joe Urban. Joe, welcome onto the show. And are you going to get a better intro than that? I don't think so. Probably not.
Well, it took 70 episodes to get that intro, so I appreciate it.
You know what it was? It was because I was so nervous to interview you. I literally needed 70 episodes. I need to interview like former Medtronic CEO Bill George, Jim Heath from Stryker, ready? All these, Antoine Papernick of Sophie Nova. I don't think it. I was ready. I should have
ready now.
No, not at all. Should have waited till episode 200.
It's good self-awareness. I like it.
Well, all jokes aside, so I think a lot of people who follow me are familiar with you just because, I always speak highly of you in terms of your leadership over Potrero. I really enjoyed my time there. We did some great things earlier on, especially when it comes to predictive health. And I wanted to have you on the show, Joe, because there's a segment I wanted to start covering, which is I've become more interested in technologies that are essentially hardware-based that automate some process, and then through that process, you end up with data that you normally would never have seen. And then by doing that, you either own a physiological function, you own an organ, both. And so Potrero is a fantastic example of that. And so maybe you can kind of kick us off on that topic.
Here's what's interesting to me. I look at different segments of medicine and problems that need to be solved, and just looking at some of the huge gaps that we have still in medicine. It's and the opportunities, I think, for us as an industry to improve patient care through technology is through applying sensors that are in the body, on the body, or in the room, whether it's in the house, in the ASC, the hospital, or back when they're recovering at home. Anywhere in that continuum of care, I think that's where it's just pretty interesting to me on what type of data that we can provide for the clinicians. And so I look at what robotics and in the operating room, the miniaturization of tools over the last 20 years, and visualization, what that did for what it did for the operating room. I think the ICU is just about to start seeing some really fast jumps and leaps in patient prediction and other aspects where the clinicians will have the data that they need. The interesting thing is the data today that is reliant on a person to enter into the EMR is at risk. It's at risk. There's data friction. There's a possibility that it may not be correct. And so anytime you can remove that variability, you help. And so, and if you can do it through automation in a time where there's a huge problem with clinicians actually leaving the industry, like we are seeing a massive labor shortage right now in the United States. It's no surprise. It's been in the news over the last 3 years from COVID and other factors. Nurses and doctors alike are leaving the industry. They're done. And so in those scenarios, how do you help the hospital? How do you help the clinician And most importantly, how do you help the patient that's in the bed? And that is, you automate some of the processes that are highly manual, very tedious, and oftentimes inaccurate. You automate it and take it off of a bedside clinician so they could focus on the patient instead of managing through the limitations of their current technology.
Yeah, and I think that I'm really happy you kind of framed it that way because definitely physician burnout is on the rise, and it's physician suicide. People don't often talk about this. It's something like 10 or 20 times higher than the average population, and I think part of it is because like even if you talk to the most burned out physician, I don't think I've ever met a physician who said they don't like the actual practice of medicine or treating patients. That's the part they all love. What they hate is that more and more of the administrative side is taking over. And then part of that, in terms of their clinical duties, as you start getting more exposure and realizing certain physiological processes and how important it is to monitor them, they're given more tasks to do. And it could be something very simple to do, but when you add 5, 10, 15, 20 of these things to constantly do throughout a patient care cycle, like it gets very overwhelming. You end up with inaccurate data, discontinuous data, and then you're making you're making the best decision off of really poor data. So I think the process of automation is really important. Can you kind of for the audience who's not aware of it, talk us through one is how did Potrero approach this problem, right?
Sure.
And we'll kind of lead that into how, at least in my opinion, because of the fact that Potrero has automated a process and receives continuous data, that you technically own an organ system, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's good. I like your opinion. So here's
I know you would.
Yeah. So here's what we do. We have a Foley catheter, one of the most commonly used medical devices in the world. It's a 100-year-old technology by itself. And so what we've done is we've placed sensors on the Foley catheter, and we've connected it to a machine that is able to overcome some of the limitations of the current technology, how to clear the tube, how to do that without compromising the integrity of the bladder. There's a lot of factors that go into getting this vital sign online. And, it's not because companies haven't tried in the past. There's every major company that's focused in the space has tried, and they've more or less failed in the past because it sounds like it's pretty simple. Just clear urine from the bladder and get into a bag. But the problem is as much of an air management issue as it is a fluid dynamic issue. And so our engineers, who many of you know, Omar, have spent the last decade figuring that out. We have now we're nearing 60,000 procedures since we have commercialized. So you do 60,000 of anything and you start to hit a point of expertise. And we feel like we have a pretty good head start. Now, the interesting part is that once you automate this, something that's never really been truly automated, once you automate it, it opens up a number of signals that have always been there, but it just required some management of the data. And what we've been able to do is we can see simple things like following the KDIGO kidney guidelines for acute kidney injury. That seems like it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. For us, automating it, that part of it, the urine output aspect, has made it very easy for clinicians to see what stage of kidney injury their patients are in. It's enabled earlier interventions at a number of the facilities where they can see it instead of waiting for a lab test to come back that shows that the patient's in acute kidney injury stage 2, as an example. We now see it bedside, eye level, and they're able to immediately jump in. Now, where I think the future, like what we're looking at in the future is not just the kidney, but taking this and aggregating it with other sensors that are inside or on the patient and enabling better prediction, ultimately to help the patient and the clinician and get the patient up and out of the hospital as soon as possible. And this, Omar, we look at this, every person in the hospital could be a family member. And if you look at it that way and you say, I'm not going to wait for it to be a family member for me to care about this, it changes the sense of urgency you have. And so today, the kidneys, before Acuren, in my opinion, they weren't covered, they weren't protected as well as they could be. and we provide a layer of and an insulation and a protection, we believe, for the clinicians and the patients.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things also that the awareness around it isn't as high. It was even me with a clinical background, I didn't realize like how many people die every year from acute kidney injury. Just for like context, like it was like 300,000 people a year in the United States die from that. And I think from breast cancer, I think it's like 60 or 70,000, something like that.
Yeah, it's a disease that is a silent killer. It kills more people than breast, colon, and prostate and lung cancers combined. It is the one of the most lethal things in the hospital, and we believe that we can impact it with our technology, at least providing the information to the clinicians so they can jump in and treat the kidneys and help the patient get better. It is truly the last vital sign to be offline. And if you can imagine that, it would be equivalent to asking a nurse to go in and check the pulse of the patient. It's just ridiculous that we're asking clinicians to do that in this day and age. And so with this technology, we're able to give that time back to the clinicians and do that. And in doing so, we hope that we help a lot of patients avoid those catastrophic outcomes. One of the things I share with the team a lot is, like imagine Thanksgiving, take away one chair. That's what you're fighting for every single day.
Yeah, and I think the other side of it that at least from when you look at the data, I think it's even more is that acute kidney injury can happen like from some procedure in the hospital, right? It's irreversible. And then a lot of patients leave the hospital without realizing, and it's not because it's the physician's fault, it's just because the technology wasn't there to catch those things. They'll leave and then they end up coming back to the hospital years later with like congestive heart failure or something else. When in reality, it was something that was more upstream, which is acute kidney injury. I think that's the biggest thing about this. And this is why I'm kind of hoping, I know Dan Burnett over at Theranova has a variety of portfolio companies that are doing this something similar in terms of like finding a vital sign, finding some physiological function, and automating the data capture of it. Because once you again own the data, then you digitize an organ, then you own that organ. Has that always been kind of like the goal for Potrero?
Well, it wasn't the goal to own the kidney. We wanted to protect the kidney, and in doing so, we believe that we'll have a pretty significant head start over any other company. And so in doing so, everything comes down to the clinical utility that you provide the bedside clinician. If you don't provide that utility to the clinician, you don't have a business. And so we feel like we have a very good technology that gives information to the clinicians that they just haven't been able to get as regularly and as accurately as we can provide. And that's the feedback we have from our customers in the market, and they're very, very happy with it. So what's interesting to me, Omar, is that there's still some items that there's still organs that are offline and vital signs that are offline that require the manual reading. So exactly what you just said. With the kidney is a prime example. It relies today, just to walk you through the way that a nurse would have to do it before accurate. They would an ICU nurse has 125 tasks per hour, every single hour. That's what they have to do, 125 tasks, and urine output per room is 5 minutes of those 125 tasks. So multiply that out, that's 2 hours per room per day. And in a number of facilities, like some of our largest facilities where we've informally done a time study, we've taken it from 2 hours a day of manual, tedious task to 3 minutes a day, and it's just literally emptying the bag. Everything else is provided in a digital format to the EMR, to the clinician's bedside, eye level, so they can see and treat the kidneys. And so that's where the power is. If you can take something that is so incredibly time consuming and manual and automate it, provide data and provide that feedback, then that's real world value that the hospital and clinicians will realize.
Do you think I don't want to put you on the spot here, but let me just use the concept of like, again, hardware to automate a process and capture data continuously, and then you essentially are able to better protect and own an organ. How do you
Yeah.
see this fitting at the strategic level, right? In terms of a strategic looking at a company like what I just described, and how that strategic can adopt that company as part of their core technology and then provide better care to a patient. Like, can you kind of paint a big picture there for us?
Well, sure. It's interesting, Omar. The I think with I can't speak for the strategics. I've worked for a couple, but over the past 25 years, but I can't speak for them. But I look at this, and I think the power is in having the sensors and the unique data stream. I think that's the future. In the future, here's where I believe we're heading. In 5-10 years from now, I think what we're going to hear from physicians and nurses and hospital administrators will be, what does your device tell me that this other device doesn't? Versus, tell me about your widget versus this widget. It's, what data can I get from yours? And all the dumb devices that are inside patients or on patients right now that provide little to no value, I think that's where we're going to see a quantum leap in utility. And so, if the clinical utility is there, so if like for us, we're providing information on acute kidney injury, we're providing information on intra-abdominal hypertension, we're providing information on core temperature, and we're aggregating all of those. And in the future, we're working on the predictive algorithms that will predict acute kidney injury for a risk profile patient. So as a patient is going into cardiac surgery, as an example, our algorithm will be looking at the risk of that patient developing acute kidney injury. To me, I look forward, and you can push this out incrementally and say, well, okay, well, if that's successful, then what happens in 5 years? What happens in 10, 15, 20, and so forth? And the way, at least I'm envisioning this and seeing it, is as you start to move forward, then it becomes more and more clear that people are going to be focused on the data, not the device. And if they're focused on the data, how accurate is your data? How accurate is your risk index, your scores? How robust is your clinical library on your clinical studies, on what you're focused on? Those are the areas where I think we're moving towards. There's just too many dumb devices inside the body that they're sitting there, and they could be doing so much more. And I think the Foley catheter is a great example. It's all over the world. It's done every single day, and it's offline. That's ridiculous. Like we with our technology alone, we're seeing a tremendous amount. I look at the other tubes and instruments that are in the body for a prolonged amount of time, and those that are not intelligent, that are not speaking back to a machine, it's a wasted opportunity.
What are some of those? What are some of those other dumb technologies?
Yeah, central line picks, anything that is sitting and residing in the body for 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 days or weeks. To me, that is something that you can get. It's valuable real estate where you can get data and process it and get it back to the clinicians.
That makes sense too, because like I think I think the other thing is, like, if you look at like drug and therapies, right, and how you deliver them, I think the importance of like capturing data continuously and more precisely is going to help like tailor those therapies. Because I mean, if you think about even managing a patient post-op, right? If you give them a bolus of one thing versus another, right? Sometimes it's too much, sometimes it's too little, and then there's a cascade of things that happen. I think like having the continuous data, especially with things that are indwelling. Your thing is like if it's on the patient and it's indwelling for more than a few hours a day, it should be capturing continuous data.
100%. Like, look at a pick. Look at where it's positioned in your body or a central line. You could get so many biometric readings, so many things just from that. And then even putting sensors on the devices to where I'll give one for free here. Okay. So imagine if you had like right now, we focus on the catheter, the Foley catheter. And so we're looking at acute kidney injury. We're trying to reduce catheter-associated infections. We're looking at intra-abdominal hypertension and trying to prevent that from going to ACS, abdominal compartment syndrome. Look at the other tubes on like the central lines and the PICCs. Those are just residing in the body for days, sometimes weeks, and there's tremendous things that they could do. As simply as registering onto the EMR that they're indwelling and notifying a clinician that like a central line has been indwelling for 2 days. Have you taken this out? There is clinical research that has been done that when it's at eye level and notifications on things like a central line, it was specific to central lines, that when a clinician is notified that the central line has been in for 2+ days, they're more apt to pay attention to that central line being in and pulling it when it can be pulled. And so not prematurely, but when it can. And so I look at something that simple, like let's automate and start with a crawl, walk, run, the other devices that are in and on the body. You look at like just some of the things that Dan Burnett's doing at Theranova with CardioSpire as an example. They're looking at waveforms inside from the vent tube, and they can see the waveforms changing in the way people are breathing. And so to me, that's pretty interesting. And then just everything in, like, think of the OR where they put a like any tube in you. To me, that is something that we should be looking at.
Yeah, and again, like, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to hide it that I obviously have a bias with Potrero because I used to work there. But again, I really look at Potrero as sort of the model example of a data-driven MedTech organization. And if I could just kind of break it down for the audience. So if you look at Potrero with the Acuren device, they focused on automating one physiological sign, which is urine output, which is an important sign, right, for physicians to track and use when it comes to diagnosing and prognosing acute kidney injury, right? So hardware automated a process. That automated process led to better data capture, which revealed more insights, because once you have continuous data and more data points, right, you're obviously able to see that, like, this problem pathology happens within this window, right? And that's what you need to be able to predict things ahead of time. And once you predict things, then you can completely prevent them, right? And so this whole process of digitizing that organ allows you to do that. Plus, more importantly, I think that there's a lot of med device companies trying to be med tech companies, which is fine. The problem is that they look at data and they're like, oh, well, if we just capture a bunch of data and go to the hospitals, they'll say, man, this is great, we'll buy it. And physicians and hospitals are overwhelmed with data. And it's not only, well, okay, do you have data? But it's like, well, okay, what am I going to do with this data? Great, I have it. Now what am I going to do with it? And I think that the value that Potrero has is that it's focusing on one very specific things, and it has a very specific pathway posted. If you could talk a little bit, because I remember, has it been a year or 2 years now since the predictive algorithm received FDA breakthrough designation?
September of 2022. So about 9 months ago, we got a breakthrough designation for our acute kidney injury prediction algorithm. So what does that mean? That means that we will do a clinical study, prove that we can predict acute kidney injury in cardiac surgery. And if we do that, we will then take it to CMS for a new technology add-on payment reimbursement code. And so to me, that's a pretty exciting pathway, because we'll be able to help a lot of patients, hopefully avoid acute kidney injury, still to be determined, to be studied, but that's where we're driving. I see this as the medical device is a nice business. We have a great business, but where it really becomes a fascinating business is when you start to have a digital product catalog. And the digital product catalog, to me, is very interesting, from software to algorithms, the capability to improve product in months instead of years, because it's a different form of medical device. It's not tangible. It's not something you can hold. It's something that is ones and zeros on the machine. To me, that is really interesting. Like, I'll give you an example of a product enhancement that that we did, Omar, we were watching a transplant, and there was a very manual process where they were transplanting a kidney into a patient, and they record the first urine that comes from the patient, and they're watching it like a hawk, because as soon as they get to a certain threshold, they are confident that the anastomosis of the kidney is correct. We were watching it, and we noticed how manual this was, and the clinician would literally, with a piece of paper and pen, start recording the time, and they would wait for the kidney to start producing. They would measure a certain amount. Within 90 days, we had a tool to where they push a button on the AccuTab, and they automated that full process. So now, in the middle of the surgery, the surgeon will say, "All right, let's do a furosemide stress test and check out the anastomosis of the kidney." They push a button, and it records it. When it hits X mils, then they're confident that the anastomosis is successful. To me, software is wonderful for medicine if it's done correctly. And so for us, it's that to me is very exciting.
Yeah, and just quick sidebar, because it's a great story, and I want to make sure that like it's captured somewhere. But can you talk a little bit through? And I was with Potrero during this time, but the conception of like AccuTab and what Potrero did during COVID with it. I just think it's such a great story, and I don't think it's told often enough.
Oh, thanks, man. Well, we when COVID, just to bring everyone back to the COVID days, so thankful we're out of them. But when it first started happening, we noticed a couple of tweets, and everyone was trying to figure out how to treat these patients. No one really knew. It was the first real pandemic.
You said you noticed some tweets. So we were actively checking Twitter back then.
Yeah.
Again, I just want to point that out, because it's too many MedTech execs are like, oh man, like, well, we think social media is important. We don't, but like literally, these are insights from Neff Twitter. So I just wanted to point that out. Sorry, continue, Joe.
Yeah. Well, they were putting pictures on, and I think you sent it to me. You said, check this out, and they were pushing all the equipment into the hall. So the nurses wouldn't have to don and doff their equipment, their PPE equipment that was like gold, right? So we got caught with not enough PPEs in the country, and so they're trying to minimize the amount of time that they would have to enter the room and exit the room and remove their equipment and their gowns and gloves and everything. And so they moved everything they could outside. So all the infusion pumps, anything that could go outside of the room, they did that. Now, what was crazy is to set infusion, they would have to go into the room to check urine output, because they would need to know what needed to go back into the patient based on what came out. And so what we did is we had a project where we were taking the screen and we were pulling it up off of the floor onto the infusion pumps, so the clinicians could see at eye level. They didn't have to get down and look bedside what was happening. And we looked at a remote monitor that had all of the parameters of Accurine, and it was in our product roadmap. And I sent Sahil, at the time, our chief technology officer. He's now the CEO of Gravitas. And I sent him a text and I said, all right, how fast can we get this out? And he said, I don't know, like a year? And I said, you have 90 days. You remember that, Omar? And he was like, what? And so it was a lot of fun, because what we did, we stripped it down, totally stripped it down. And the way we're looking at it is we have 90 days to get this done for documentation, getting the technology up and running, but then just documenting everything required for a medical device and all the record of file, all that stuff. And so Dimitri and Sahil got the R&D team together remotely, because no one was really using Zoom at the time. And they were using Zoom, and they said, okay, we have 90 days to get this product across the line. And they worked morning, night, weekends, everything for 6 weeks, and they got it out. And so it wasn't 90 days, it was 6 weeks. So it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I remember, I think the part that I'm most proud of is that I remember that we essentially sent out and loaned out our Accurine units and those AccuTabs to hospitals who were not customers, just to help during COVID, which I thought was fantastic, you know? I think
Yep,
we were.
the very
I think we were to be honest with you, I think I don't maybe with the exception of like massive companies like Abbott, but even then, I think we were the first medtech company to do that actually during COVID.
well. I think here's the thing. LinkedIn, as far as LinkedIn goes, I can't remember seeing anybody doing remote training of our technology or any technology.
No,
And
yeah.
we were doing it. Rich Keenan did it within a couple of days of the national lockdown. We had a hospital in Arkansas
Yeah,
that went
I
live,
remember.
and he came into the office and did a Zoom, and he trained them and everybody was very serious because they didn't know what they were going into. And within 90 minutes, we had their entire clinical staff up and running on Zoom, and we believe that was one of the first. Back to the AccuTap story, just one more thing. Barbara McLean at Grady Hospital was the very first to do it. And so, just to close that out, Omar, what would happen is it would plug into the Acuren, and we'd have a 15-foot cord that would go outside of the room or in the window to where they could see what the kidney was producing. So it saved the clinician from having to enter the room and blowing through a PPE. And so it was a success. It was a lot of fun. Honestly, it wasn't fun. It was a very proud moment, at least for me, to see our team do something so quickly and in response for a national emergency. I felt like that was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It really was. And I think, I'm hoping to see more medtech companies kind of take the same approach, which is like if they're going to have some kind of a data play, which I think to raise money these days, like you have to have something that's digital and has some kind of data play within it. But to kind of take it in terms of a lot more of a disciplined and focused approach of like thinking about a physiological sign or a vital sign or something in the body and really focus on owning it and tracking that back to an organ system versus again, like I think in the early 2000s, maybe even somewhat late 2000s, you can do this thing where it's like, hey, we're just going to capture a bunch of data and then, our company valuation will go up. I think we're way past that point, and now there needs to be like a lot more of a focus and disciplined approach to it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, here's how I see it, man. If you look at Intuitive 23 years ago when they were just getting their FDA approval, they're trying to sell the technology, and it took them years to get up and running. Try unseating Intuitive now. It's going to be very difficult for anybody to come in and take robotic share. Like that's why their market cap is where it is. I don't know if you saw it, Omar, but their market cap, they're worth more than Medtronic is on the market, and they're worth more than Stryker. This is a company where you could buy their shares for $1 20 years ago, right? And they've created such great clinical value for the surgeons and for the hospitals and for the patients. It's indisputable, and they've had a pretty good head start. Those that are trying to do it now, it's going to be very difficult for them to unseat Intuitive. And I see this as the same way. I see this as those that own data and data streams and have access to data that has clinical meaning to the clinicians, that helps the patients, they will have a very good business. But as long as they're focused on helping the patients. And so helping the patients, just like Intuitive helped reduce variability and increased the amount of capabilities the surgeons had, if you can do the same thing with data and you can provide that to the clinicians, and my personal take, and I know I'm biased, so I'm going to sound like a homer here, but I believe it's the sensors that are, like I've said in this interview, like the sensors in and on the patient are the most accurate as long as the data has been validated. So like the sensors have been validated, and we're on 60,000 procedures. So I feel pretty confident saying like we're doing pretty well. When I look at this, Omar, I look at it and say there's value in that data. And if you provide algorithms and data to a clinician that help them in that moment and give them capabilities that they didn't have yesterday, then that's what changes the game. And that's what Intuitive did 20 years ago. Because I remember when I was at Boston Scientific and doing endourology, and we saw this room, and there was like 5 doctors outside looking in, and there was a brand new urologist. This was in Dallas, Texas, and they were looking in and shaking their heads. And I remember them saying, this thing's never going to fly. Like this is taking them forever. And it was, and obviously in urology, Intuitive owns the prostate. They own that procedure, but it was what got them their head start. And so you look at that and you say, okay, if you can cross that chasm and you can get across the first chasm and rev the engine for the second one, because there is a second one, and you make that second one, then you're set. And I feel like we're right before our first chasm. And so we're about to take the jump. And as soon as we clear that chasm, then it's time to rev the engine for that second one. And then we should have a very good business beyond that. Owning an organ like Intuitive owned the procedure. The prostatectomy, now I think 90% of all prostates are done with the robot. That's incredible. That was not the case 20 years ago. All right. That took a lot of dedication. So
absolutely. And, just like, it's funny, like one of the heuristics I always love is just like follow the money. The money, like it's always a sort through, even when it doesn't, when that shouldn't apply, like in random scenarios, like forget business, like just in random, it's always the money. And if you look at open payments if you look at like Medtronic and J&J, a big majority of what their payments go to are like royalties and licenses, consulting, right? But if you look at Intuitive, something like 50 or 60% of Intuitive's budget that's on reported and open payments went towards education. So like all the top 9 of the 10 payees from Intuitive last year, it's like a total of $32 million. It's all academic centers. So they're just focusing on the education, the training of like, this is how you do it. This is how you do this procedure. And then of course the robot serves as a vehicle for that. Joe, just, I know you're busy. And so just as we kind of wrap up, just out of curiosity, aside from Potrero, what are some other companies that kind of come to mind where you feel like based on their data, based on their digitization of a pathology or an organ system, what other companies do you kind of put in the same category as Potrero?
Well, there's a lot of great technologies right now. And, I think what I look at like Cerebell and what they've done with brainwaves, it's pretty incredible. And they've built an amazing business and something that is to be admired. I think that they have helped a lot of patients, and they're definitely helping the hospitals and the clinicians. And so I look at Cerebell and they're just doing a great job. Super impressed with everything that they've been able to achieve in the last 3 to 4 years. Like it's pretty amazing. And then I look at a number of companies like that are tackling some pretty big problems, like some of the predictive analytics companies that are looking at how to reduce clinical errors in the hospital, how to see earlier what's happening. Some of the wearables, they're starting in pediatrics, but then they're moving over to adults, but they're picking a very specific call point on the front end. And to me, that's a pretty good strategy. I think it's always fun to watch the robotics, and like I love watching Moon Surgical with our old friend Jeff Alvarez, and Noonan and all the guys that used to be at Oris. They're doing some really cool things, and I think they're going to just crush it. I'm
excited for them. Yeah, and since Anne has done a great job as CEO in terms of like telling the story of the technology and the vision of the company. And again, they're doing something different, and it doesn't, feel like they're trying to compete directly with Intuitive. Obviously they are in some ways, but there are, I don't want to mention any other company names, but there's some companies where it's just like blatant, like Da Vinci knockoff. And I'm just like, that's not how you win. But yeah, Moon has had some really exciting news with, so like Fred Moll joined their board. NVIDIA led their last round. So it's like really interesting what they're doing. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's they've done a fantastic job. It's really good.
There are two companies. So it's a little bit different, but like on the topic of like hardware and automation, two companies. The other side of this is like companies that use hardware, software to put the skills of a specialist in the hands of like a generalist is really exciting. So two companies come to mind. One is my buddy Cody Simmons, who's CEO over at DermaSensor. Essentially, it's a hardware that detects different types of carcinomas on the skin, right? And so they're
Yeah,
putting that in the hands of like primary care doctors, right? So that the skills of a dermatologist in the hands of
Great.
primary care. The other side, which is really interesting, because I've seen their devices. I know a lot, cardiologist uses Echo. So Echo, a lot of people think it's a cardiology company. I think it's a primary care company, because they're essentially taking their
yeah.
digitized stethoscope, putting it in the hands of primary care doctors to capture and catch, heart murmurs, pathologies of the heart that increases a referral pattern for cardiologists. So there's two that kind of come to mind that are pretty exciting.
Echo is a great company. Eric Davidson's a stud.
Eric's over there.
Yeah.
He's supposed to be coming on the show sometime soon. So, but they have him.
Back.
He's and then Joseph Othman, he's the VP of sales over there. Another guy's been on the show a couple times. They have a really solid team. Joe, just thanks for coming on the show, but just kind of want to wrap up. What are your kind of thoughts, just kind of rounding out the year for MedTech? It's kind of been an interesting year in terms of like, the venture capital side of things. I mean, the beginning of the year was just like absolute chaos with the Silicon Valley Bank collapse, the FTX, like there's just all kinds of nonsense. And now it feels like we're in really like quiet times. Like it's a little bit more quiet than usual. So just kind of your take on the market right now.
So I'm, this, Omar, positive thinking, optimist. Even when the bank collapsed, it was just kind of like, I didn't have that one.
This is why we get along. We get along so well. Yeah.
But it was really interesting to see, the psychology of a bank collapse, and the fact that, like we were at spring break and down at Disney World with the kids, and I walked out of one ride and I had a text from the CFO saying, our bank just collapsed. And I was like, what? Like, how does it even happen in this day and age? But with Twitter, it happened. Like, everybody just knowing the mindset of Silicon Valley, it was the same people that were saying support Silicon Valley are the same people that drained the bank like that. And so to me, it was terrible to watch, and it was just, and what's crazy, Omar, is we were supposed to close on our funding that day. So it actually happened the week after. And so, and it was originally the week before, we're like, all right, we'll close on this Friday. And then there was something that happened, and they said, we're going to close the next week. And so at the time I was like, all right, that's only a week. And that next Friday, everything closed or shut down. Like, it's a bank collapsed. And I was like, what does this even mean? And so, it shows you that you have to have a resilient mindset to do anything like this. And you have to have a mindset that, and I don't want to say no fear. It's just that you have to mitigate the fear, and you just have to keep driving forward. And even if you can't see the top of the hill, you just have to keep chugging along. But what I would tell you is, my personal take is, I think what we're going to see is we're going to probably see more collaborations. You're going to see venture and other companies that are looking at partnerships and how do they force multiply themselves in the field, and as a company, how do they stretch dollars further? Because the growth dollars that came in 17, 18, 19, 20 till COVID, those days are gone. And so it's how do you create a great business? How do you drive forward? How do you make sure that the technology hits mass market, and how do you keep driving forward? And so hospitals feel like they're kind of getting their feet under them. They've had a couple of 1-2 punches, first with COVID, and then with Omicron, which was COVID part 2, and then you had the nurse crunch and shortage, and it's just one thing after another for a hospital. And it's like that their technical folks are leaving the industry because they're burned out. And so I think there's going to be a regrouping. There's definitely going to be a greater requirement for healthcare economic outcome research. So your outcomes, like how do you really help a hospital either make money or save money? That's going to be a requirement. And I do believe that we're moving into an era over the next 20 years where data is going to be the most important thing in the hospital. How do I make better decisions? How do I help the clinicians? And you're seeing it, dude, in every aspect of our life with ChatGPT and other tools that are coming on board. You're only going to see more of it. And our industry will be a little slower because we're regulated, but just watch, man. The next 20 years, I think that's going to be the golden ticket for anybody that figures it out.
Absolutely. No, I wholeheartedly agree. And again, I'm with you. I mean, actually, I knew, I understood it, but I never really embraced it as much until I like worked for you, which is this concept of like, I don't know, your perceptions really do paint your reality. And so when you decide to be, to have a perception of like abundance and opportunity and positivity, it doesn't mean to have like blind positivity, but like, like for example, when COVID happened, because again, I was working for you. I remember I told my wife at the time, I was like, hey, this is going to be our greatest year. I was like, and it was right when COVID happened. I was like, we're going to make a lot of great things happen. We got in much better shape that year. We had a lot of opportunities created for ourselves, personal and professional life. And so I think that like, no matter what, life is going to happen. And so I think this concept that like, I think a lot of CEOs and people can benefit from, which is how do you focus on the things that you want to happen and take action towards that? Because that's a much better way to live life than to constantly allow like the negative to weigh you down and for you to use that sort of in the back of your mind as an excuse as to, oh, this is not going to happen because of this. I mean, look, COVID should have been like a death sentence for Potrero, because at the time, we disbanded from a partnership. We only had like 2 or 3 salespeople, and we were in the middle of raising money. But we packed the pipeline, we raised money that year. Like all these great things happened, should not have happened. And I think part of it was because things flow top down, and Joe Urban was leading the charge, saying we're gonna make it through this. And I remember those team calls.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, man, and this is what I've reminded myself of recently. Like choice. You have a choice. Like you can choose to let drama enter your life, or you could choose not to. And it sounds silly, but like when I've gotten upset over the last couple of weeks or months, say, wait, why am I choosing that? I don't choose to have that drama in my life. I don't care. And so I choose to move on. And so when you give yourself a choice, and when you're upset or you're looking at something saying, why am I upset? Am I choosing to be upset? Am I choosing to let this person bother me, or this situation get on my nerves? Why am I choosing that? Because you're choosing it when you show that emotion. Mm-hmm. And so anytime that you put yourself back into control and say, I choose not to. And Omar, you saw Rebecca a little bit ago. She was saying something to me, and it was about somebody. And I just said, I choose not to think about that. And it's like, just, you have to do that. Like you have to focus on what you choose to do. It's just, it's what you can control, man, every day. Like you can control, are you going to have a good day or a bad day? Like, are you going to think of negative thoughts, or are you going to reinforce your positive ones? How are you going to push through and push forward? So.
Absolutely. Well, and I hope someday you either do a course or write a book on this like leadership style, because I'll tell you, like, it was very inspiring, and I learned a lot just watching you lead the organization through really tough times when we had some layoffs, people had to leave, and just I really mean it. And the way you chose to treat people on their way out, the way you were supportive, you acknowledge people, even the most junior people on their way out, whether they changed jobs or was due to a layoff at the time. Acknowledging their contributions to the organization and everything. And so, I think there's a lot to be said about that. And so, I'm really happy that you're a young CEO, because like you got a lot in you. And so I'm excited to see like all things you do, but you got to write that book. Definitely.
All right.
Post Potrero, when you're on your sabbatical, I'll help you write that book.
There you go, Omar. Well, awesome. And I'm excited to see all your success, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Well, Joe, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm definitely going to have you back. We'll have to have you back because we do more like of a casual leadership one, because there's all kinds of topics that like you and I can just riff about. I think the audience would really like a lot. But for the time being, man, thanks for coming on. I'll plug your LinkedIn for those who are listening. Go check out what Potrero's doing. Go to PotreroMed.com, or also follow their Instagram handle. You have an Instagram handle, but follow them on LinkedIn, and definitely follow Joe on LinkedIn. He's got a fantastic LinkedIn presence and really does a great job storytelling what Potrero's up to. So with that being said, I'm Omar Khateeb, your host for the State of MedTech, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you for enjoying another epic episode of the State of MedTech. If you're feeling inspired and love this episode, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you never miss an episode. And be sure to give us 5 stars and write a short review, because that helps more people discover this amazing community of ours. If you're a company who has a executive that you'd like to be on the show, or perhaps you want to sponsor one of the episodes, shoot us an email at hello@khateebandco.com. Take care. See you next time.